Hey folks, I'm JC, and this channel is all about how to run fantastic one-shot adventures and short campaigns. And today I'm going to be traveling across the centuries in a review of A Measure of Revenge, the adventure included in the Highlander supplement for the Everyday Heroes RPG. If you haven't heard of it, Everyday Heroes is a fairly new RPG inspired by the old, very popular D20 modern system, but refreshed so that players of newer editions of Dungeons & Dragons will find it familiar. It's tuned for the cinematic action-adventure genre, with robust rules for guns, explosions, vehicles, hacking, and lots more. And anyone who's played D&D in the last few years will find it very familiar, so you as a GM don't have to spend hours and hours explaining the rules to your group. You can just start playing. When Everyday Heroes launched, it took an interesting approach with its adventure supplements. They were all based on popular action movies. As someone who likes to run one-shots for his group, I thought this was a fun experiment. It gave gamers settings that they were already immediately familiar with, which makes it even easier to sell your players into trying a new game. And all of the supplements include robust adventures with maps, handouts, and pre-generated characters, so you GMs just don't have to do a lot of work to put together a killer session for your players. And one of those supplements was Highlander. I'm a big fan of Highlander. I've seen all of the movies, although I'll deny that some exist. Highlander the Source. I've never heard of that one. I've seen the entire series. Hearing Queen makes me want to reach for a sword, and I'm cautiously optimistic about the rumored Henry Cavill reboot. Highlander is a cool universe where immortals walk the earth, some good, some evil. They cannot die unless someone takes their head and with it their power. On paper, Highlander is a universe built for role-playing. Powerful heroes, strong, often crazy villains, and epic sword fights. But the Highlander universe also comes with some serious gaming challenges. Its mythology is inconsistent at best. It's difficult to pull off flashbacks, which are a hallmark of the Highlander movies and series, in an RPG, where player agency might rip a huge hole in your carefully crafted plot. And as cool as those sword fights are, they're almost always one-on-one, so what are the other players doing when that's happening? Well, Everyday Heroes takes a swing at all of this with their adventure A Measure of Revenge, included in its Highlander supplement. In it, the immortal PCs begin as stalwart allies of Joan of Arc, way back in the medieval ages. But they are soon flash-forwarded into modern-day New York City, where a phantom from their past pulls them into a twisted game of revenge involving a bold heist, lost artifacts, and some deadly opponents. Does A Measure of Revenge live up to the legacy of Highlander? Is it more Highlander 1 or Highlander 2? Well, grab your trench coats and katanas and get ready for some serious spoilers, because not only am I going to give you a full review of Highlander, A Measure of Revenge, I'm going to give you GM some tips and tricks on how to run this one like a pro. The Everyday Heroes Highlander book includes an overview of the universe, new hero options, game master advice, and expanded rules for dueling, so your epic sword fights just don't turn into typical I go, you go, D20 combats whittling away hit points. It's all pretty solid. But today I'm focusing on its adventure, A Measure of Revenge, written by veteran game designer Ray Sosby. This adventure runs about 40 pages, about a third of the length of the book. For full disclosure, while I backed the Everyday Heroes Kickstarter myself, the good folks at Evil Genius Games heard that I was a huge fan of Highlander and sent me a copy of this supplement. I received this product for free to review, but this video is not sponsored and I wasn't paid to give a specific opinion. All thoughts and opinions on this adventure are my own and based on my own honest playthrough. It took my group 2 sessions to get through A Measure of Revenge. There's a lot of open-ended investigation in the middle of this adventure, so my guess is that it will take most groups between 2 and 3 sessions to get through it. It also includes 5 third-level pre-generated characters, which I always appreciate, so you can start playing right away without dragging your players through character creation. Now for you fellow Highlander fans watching this supplement is purely based on the universe established in the first movie. This means that its lore is a little different from what you'd expect in places. You won't find Watchers, Dark Quickening, Sorcerers, and thank God no Planet Zeist. But if you're a fan of all of that, it's actually pretty easy to modify, with one exception, which I'll get into in a little bit. There's a lot of moving parts in this adventure and it's pretty open-ended in some places, but let me explain it in a way that I think most groups will get through it. It begins in the year 1429. The famous Joan of Arc is leading the French army and is days away from breaking the siege at Orleans, a huge turning point in the 100-Year War between France and England, but she has many enemies surrounding her. The PCs are immortals, summoned by a kindly priest, a fellow immortal named Father Adam, who tells them that it's critical that Joan lives through the battle. He asks them to join Joan's army, along with another immortal ally, a Spanish warrior named Iago Ortiz Belen. The first act of this adventure plays out kind of like a medieval fantasy RPG, with the PCs sneaking into Joan's camp, joining her, stopping an assassination attempt in her tent, and then participating in the epic Battle of Les Tourelles, leading an attack on the city of Orleans and fighting off English soldiers to keep Joan of Arc alive. However, there's a twist here in that their supposed immortal ally, Iago Ortiz Belen, is a turncoat. At the last minute in the battle, he tries to assassinate Joan of Arc with a crossbow, and in epic Highlander fashion, the PCs will end up dueling Iago and chopping off his head. While I think this first act is overly long, I shortened it a bit, otherwise I was afraid it would take up an entire session of combats, but it works really well. The PCs have lots to juggle during the siege, and I like that the adventure does a good job separating players a little bit, which means that it's logical why one player will end up dueling the villainous Iago while the others are keeping Joan of Arc alive and fighting off the forces of the English. There's just a lot to do for the players. I also make a slight tweak to the opening, where I made one of the players an ordinary mortal. He was loyal to Joan of Arc, just a soldier caught up in the battle. I then unleashed a lot of aggressiveness on this player during the battle, and in the last part, he ended up getting heroically slain by a hail of arrows while protecting Joan. Of course, he'd come back to life as a new immortal, but having him start as a mortal and experiencing his death made the battle seem more dangerous to other players, and it also gave that player an interesting story compared to everyone else who tended to be a little more reckless in that battle because they knew they were immortal. The battle won Joan safe. The adventure then flashes forward to modern-day New York City. The PCs, who probably have scattered to the winds in the previous 600 years, are all summoned from wherever they are in the world to the Cloisters Museum in New York. This is actually one of my favorite museums in real life, so props to the author for that. A savvy police detective, Gina Vasco, is investigating 2 murders and a robbery at the museum. It seems that a few nights ago, someone broke into the museum and stole all of the items from a brand new Joan of Arc exhibit, including her sword, Legende, her banner, a jeweled crown of the Dauphin, and a detailed journal written by the English commander of the Battle of Orleans. Worse, 2 security guards are dead, killed by a Moorish sword. And weirdly, the PC's names were all found on a slip of paper left behind by the thief. And when the PCs see the security footage, they'll be shocked that the thief is clearly Iago Ortiz Belen, the immortal that they beheaded in the first part of the adventure. How could this be? This stunning realization sets the PCs on a quest to recover the stolen artifacts and confront the seeming ghost. So here's what's actually going on here. The thief is not, in fact, Iago Ortiz Belen. He's Amaldo Belen, the nephew of Iago, who bears a strong resemblance to his uncle. Amaldo became an immortal during that Battle of Orleans, and discovering that his uncle was killed by the PCs, he swore revenge. And now, 600 years later, Amaldo is planning to terrorize the PCs, potentially reveal their identities as immortals, and then behead them one at a time. Okay, even though I disclaimed a few minutes ago that this entire supplement and adventure is based on the first Highlander movie, this is a violation of what is considered canon now. It's been established decades ago that immortals are all orphans and have no families. Since I wanted to keep my game closer to the canon that my players knew, I had to say that Amaldo was not in fact a blood relative. He was a nephew in name only. But he styled himself after his uncle who he just worshipped as a youth. He grew the same facial hair and even wore some prosthetics during the robbery to freak the players out that his uncle had come back from the dead. It's not a perfect fix, but since his motivation is to haunt and terrorize the PCs, it works. Realizing the PCs aren't directly involved in the robbery and murders, Detective Vasco asks for their help to solve the case. And the PCs will be motivated to, especially with their personal connection to the thief here. It's all a mysterious and exciting start to the next part of the adventure, which is recovering those stolen artifacts. Each of the 4 artifacts is scattered around the city. Each gives a clue as to Amaldo's identity and whereabouts. He's hiding out in an abandoned subway station in the Bronx. The only artifact the PCs won't be able to find is Joan of Arc's sword, Legende, which Amaldo is keeping for himself to chop the PCs' heads off. Finding each artifact takes some thinking and investigation, and each one presents a very different sort of challenge for the players to have to face. Joan of Arc's banner is held by Father Adam, that immortal way back at the beginning of the adventure who first asked the PCs to protect Joan of Arc. The years haven't been kind to Father Adam. He's changed his name, become reclusive, and he's a depressed, broken man, very different from the kindly father they met, a few hours before in the adventure. And worse, he's being manipulated by his new wife, Dora, and become the face of a right-wing evangelical cult. Father Adam also believes that Iago Belen has somehow returned from the grave, and his wife, in fact, traded all of his old journals, which detail a lot of the history of the PCs, in exchange for the banner. For the PCs to recover the banner, they'll have to infiltrate this church, which is very well guarded by goons, and confront their old friend and his obsessed wife, who is a fantastic villain. Dora is greedy, fanatical, religious, and keeps her immortal husband drugged up all the time. She knows all about the immortals and views the PCs as usurpers to her evangelical empire. I wish the adventure gave a little more information on how to run Dora. It just sort of says that she has these qualities and then lets the GM figure this out. I wish it just suggested things that she would actually do when the PCs crash into the place. But I'll talk about later how I expand her role later on in the adventure. But here the PCs will discover that their foe is planning an ambush in an old subway station later on. The Dauphin's crown is about to be auctioned off on the online black market. It's held by a Russian broker named Pufftunks82. The players need to infiltrate his tight operation and either convince this Russian to give the crown back or steal it back from his very high security facility. They'll also discover that Pufftunk92 was given the crown by a man named Simon Cornier, a curator at the museum who's working with Amaldo, which is where they'll get the clue that it's not in fact Iago Belen who's involved here, as well as that Simon was operating out of the Bronx. This lets them hone in a little bit more on where Amaldo's hiding out. Finally, the battle journal is in the care of a retired medieval linguistics professor named Dr. Ethan Kahn. Much of the journal was written in code, so he's deciphering it for Amaldo. His life is a mess. His finances are in the pits, his wife is dying, and he's done a lot of illegal work over the years, which is catching up to him. And in the journals, the PCs can discover that Iago had this immortal nephew, Amaldo, and that It's not actually a man back from the dead terrorizing them. But Dr. Khan, familiar with the events of the battle as described in the journals, will start to figure out that the PCs are the same people described there, somehow alive after 600 years, so he's a threat to their immortal identities. To keep their secret safe and recover the journal, the players are going to have to do some scrambling and great role-playing here. Or, in the case of my players, they just blackmailed Dr. Khan and threatened him that if he ever let out their secrets, they'd come back for him. That works too. All of this investigation and clues will eventually combine to cue the players that Amaldo has been toying with them and that he has a hideout in an abandoned subway station in the Bronx. Here, Amaldo awaits the PCs, the sword legendary in hand, and a hostage, NYPD Detective Gina Vasco, held by his bunch of sword-wielding goons. When the PCs enter the subway, he'll challenge each of them to a one-on-one duel, threatening that if they team up on him, Vasco is dead. So one at a time, the PCs will have to step up and duel Amaldo, and if they're skilled and lucky, they will take his head and bring his villainous plot to an end. It's really quite unfair. My plan was perfect. I even had this abandoned subway station all picked out for the perfect Highlander battle. And that's the conclusion of A Measure of Revenge. So what do I think? This adventure captures a ton of what you'd expect in a Highlander adventure. An interesting flashback scene, an investigation across New York, and a villain with a historical motivation for revenge. I like that it combines big action sequences like that opening siege with an open-ended, more slow-paced investigation in the middle. It knows that RPGs are built for multiple characters, and the author does her best to try to throw multiple threats and challenges at the group at once, except for really that final duel. While it's written to support up to 5 PCs, I'd actually run this adventure with as few as possible. I think 3 is better. That's what I ran it with. And for those of you who like to play RPGs with 1 GM and 1 player, this adventure would probably be a really good one for that. If the adventure has a superpower, it's the many wonderful NPCs present. I just love how much effort has gone into them, from the beleaguered Dr. Khan, who is way over his head, poor hopeless Father Adam, who has that big character change halfway through the adventure, and the manipulative evangelical wife Dora. The Russian broker is great too. There's just so many of them that are so well developed and have fun personalities. As a GM, it was just a pleasure and so easy to roleplay these individuals, all with their quirks and motivations and interesting backstories. But, and this is a big but, the least interesting NPC in the adventure is its main villain, Amaldo. Which is a shame because Highlander villains are supposed to be so incredibly strong. But Amaldo's personality and motivations just aren't really that fleshed out. Yes, he's motivated by revenge for something that happened 600 years ago. And yes, he has a penchant for creating very convoluted vengeance plans. Excuse me, my plan is hardly convoluted. I simply arranged a new museum display. I broke in, stole some artifacts, killed 2 guards, left notes with my hated opponents' names on it for the police to find, hired some spies to follow them around. Then I scattered the artifacts across New York City, which contain vague hints that they are immortals. Yes, I know that's against the rules of the game, but they're only vague hints. And then I'll lure them to my secret subway station where I'll chop off their heads. But what do you mean I could have just ambushed them in an alley somewhere? Where's the fun in that? But Amaldo is just not a very compelling villain, especially by Highlander standards. Think the Kurgan. Mom. But this is actually very fixable. The adventure gives you everything you need to make him more compelling. I actually said that Amaldo was in deep with Dora, the evangelical woman who's actually the strongest villain in this adventure. I love that she's manipulative, greedy, knows about immortals, and has no problem keeping one of them drugged up and under her control. She's fantastic, and so I tweaked the adventure to include more of her. I said that once Dora discovered immortals, she was on the hunt for more of them. She begged her weak and useless husband, Father Adam, for the secret to immortality. He doesn't really know, of course, but he was afraid of her, so he lied and just made something up. He said that mortals can become immortal in certain conditions, like if a holy sword, like Legende, cuts off the head of an immortal in a mortal's presence. Well, that might work. He guessed that this would never happen and that Dora would drop it, but she didn't. It played right into her fanaticism and belief in religious miracles. So this gets Dora to trying to find another immortal more like her, someone cunning and power-hungry, and she found Amaldo. She seduced him and convinced him that she'd give him all the power and influence he wanted through her cult. This appeals to him. Being a cult leader, this sounded great to this guy who over the last 600 years just hadn't achieved what he wanted, and he became absolutely obsessed with her and this idea. She convinced Amaldo to set up this entire plot. She wanted the crown and the journal sold off for millions of dollars to help fund her church. She wanted that banner for her congregation to act as a holy relic, just to give her cult more authenticity. And finally, she wanted Amaldo to lure other immortals to their deaths with her present so that she could gain immortality by their deaths by a holy sword. Dora probably even offered up her husband's head as the first victim, but Father Adam wouldn't leave holy ground at the church, so Amaldo couldn't get to him. He was probably a little superstitious about killing a priest anyway. But they discovered the PC's existence from Adam's old journals with the plan to impersonate Uncle Iago and lure them to the subway station where they could kill them. So in the end, Amaldo was down with this plan, but not especially because he has carried a 600-year-old grudge, but because he loved Dora and wanted to lead her cult with her. And this lets you give your players two villains in the final showdown. Amaldo, who's obviously a very dangerous 600-year-old immortal and craving power, and Dora, who will have no problems gunning down the PCs so that her boyfriend Amaldo can chop their heads off with Legende, hoping that it will somehow make her immortal. It won't, but she's crazy. Amaldo's obsessed with her, and together, these two are doubly unpredictable and dangerous villains. I just think that connecting those villains together dramatically increases the stakes in the adventure and gives the GM more flexibility to toy with the players and surprise them. Another small change I made to this adventure was to have Amaldo taunt the players more during the investigation. He probably told the various NPCs who held the artifacts that the PCs would be coming, so I had him leave little notes and messages to them along the way, all pretending to be his Uncle Iago. This really irritated the players, getting these poetic notes that mocked them as Iago, threatened to reveal their secrets or even kill their loved ones. All of which motivated the players even more to track him down. But other than the weak motivation of the chief villain, the adventure is a solid one. It's clearly written by a fan, has many callbacks to the Highlander movies, and it's well produced too, with good art, maps of all the key locations, which I appreciate, and lots of backstory. It's maybe a little overwritten in parts, especially the read aloud text, so just make sure you familiarize yourself with it so you can sum stuff up to your players a little faster. But that's a minor nitpick. If you're a Highlander fan, this is well made. Oh, and for those of you who are going to run this adventure over virtual tabletop, I created some bonus tokens for some of the non-illustrated NPCs and some new handouts like a taunting note from Amaldo, and you can download them on my website. Check the link in the description below. If you've played this adventure, let me know in the comments below how it went. I'd love to know how your group fared against the forces of immortal darkness here. Until next time, I'm JC. And just remember, in the end, there can be only one.
Yes!